best investment I made is a clock that projects onto the wall, so I can see the time for my bed.
Oh, that's
100%
awesome.
recommend. I love that thing.
That's really nice.
Hey guys,
Welcome back.
Hi.
back. The whole gang's back now.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to take the lead?
Yeah, Bridget, this was kind of your topic idea, so why don't you introduce the topic and then we can chat about it.
So today we're going to be talking about like limitations and when to push things in your dog's training versus when to start to manage it. Particularly, this topic came about when we're seeing, as I was seeing with my clients, people said, oh, I can never do this, I can never do A, B, or C, which coming from an outside point of view, I'm like, we could definitely work on that. Or they bring something else up and I'd be like, let's not push that topic. So we're here to talk a little bit about that today.
Kind of the balance of it. I've seen a lot of the limitations even come from people that have maybe worked with trainers previously.
Yeah.
And they've said that like, oh, the trainer said the dog just would never be able to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe, like you said, you had that dog that came from a rescue that was like, it can only wear a harness. It can never do this. It can never be around dogs. It can, stuff like that. So I think there are certainly real limitations that certain dogs may have that, you may never actually see a ton of change or progress in. But there's, I'd say more so, kind of self-imposed limitations that we put on our dogs. And I think the intention behind it varies. I think some people have good intention in doing it because they maybe feel bad for the dog, or they don't want to see the dog stressed, or whatever it might be, if that's kind of a requirement to work through whatever the problem is. I also think sometimes it becomes a very convenient excuse, so that you don't have to like put in time and energy to work with your dog.
Do hard things with your dog because people want the results, but sometimes they have a difficult time putting in the work to get those results or achieve those results, which can be pretty difficult for some people.
Yep.
And I feel like it kind of like snowballs those effects too sometimes, where it could be as simple as like, well, I'll never be able to, take my dog somewhere or whatever and go on a walk where there's kids or dogs and stuff. And so you stop doing it or whatever, and then you just create more of the issues, the behavior issues of that aggression towards, or that fear, aggression, whatever, reactivity towards those things, because you just already have it in your head that you're not going to do it. And so it clearly isn't helping the dog at all. So you'll never actually get a chance to work through it,
I think, like one of the most common ones that I think we can all agree on that we see is I can never do my dog's nails without them being heavily medicated or sedated. And that's one I hear all the time, like the vet told me I could never do the nails, and we've all heard that, and within the hour session or follow-up or send home, we're able to complete the nail trim because it's not about setting the limitations, be like, oh, they can't do that. It's like we need to persist and find a way that we can successfully do this nail trim so we can take back a little bit of the balance in the dog relationship, human to dog.
Oh, yeah.
And the good thing about the nail trims is I think, again, even that, it has you can help the dog in so many more ways than just the nail trim if you work through nail trims. You can work on the whole touching so they're better at the vets. You can work on their confidence with just being around those noises and stuff like that, like the Dremel even grinding on their nails. So I think there's certain things that you, again, are taking away from the dog to be able to do by just not doing one thing,
Yeah, you're like, this is humanizing it a bit, but you're almost like infantilizing them.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you couldn't possibly get over this, or like be able to handle this. Yeah, where it's like, no, I mean, I've had, actually just today, I have a session with clients that their dog has to be fully sedated for nail trims. And they told me that at their last session the dog had really extensive reactivity, so that was kind of like our full focus. And then it was like, once we got that to a really, really good spot, we were talking at the last session and they were like, Oh yeah, and she has to be like fully sedated for nail trims. And I don't remember how it came up, but they just kind of like nonchalantly said it, and I was like, well, that's a problem. We gotta work on that now. So we set up another session for them to come in to get that figured out. And they're like, I don't know, like it's really bad, you know, all this stuff. And I was like, I've never not been able to do a dog's nail.
Yeah.
Like never.
It might take a few sessions.
Exactly. I'm not saying I'll accomplish it and get it perfect in 1 hour today, but like we will get it done.
Yeah.
I'm doing that right now with the dog as well.
Yeah.
It's been struggling with its nails, and so I just set up a few more follow-ups, and that's what all we're doing the whole time.
Yeah, it's like to me that's never a limitation.
Yeah, it's a process. Like things that you encounter with your dog may become a process where you have to do it several times, but putting in the work to be part of that process, he ends in like really good results with being able to handle your dog and being able to have more of that relationship that they're looking at you and they're like, I have to.
I feel like it gives the owners a lot of confidence as well in that point. Whereas when they overcome the thing that they never thought they were going to be able to do, it's huge not only for the dog but also for the owner.
They're like, wait, my vet was wrong?
Right.
I'm like, yeah, your vet can sometimes be wrong, which is you know, why I often tell people like go vet shopping, find somebody that's able to listen to you and come up with a couple different solutions rather than medicate.
Yeah, I just actually started sessions with a client. This dog's extremely fearful and anxious, and the vet actually, I was super pleased, which it was Tremont, so I'm not surprised, but they medicated the dog initially, but the vet was like, this is not a long-term fix. I do not want this dog on medication long-term. Go here to get training, and then we can wean off the medication. And I thought that was awesome. Like that's how, you know, every vet I feel like should handle that. Like, yes, we can do medication in the meantime, you know, to help the dog cope a little bit better, but like this should not be like a long-term fix at all. And the dog has done phenomenally well. Yeah. Like so well. So yeah, I think that there's like, I think there's certainly kind of what I touched on earlier, like there are some certain things that probably could be limitations, like my own dog. Lumos is never going to like be a friendly, affectionate dog with strangers. Yeah. That is a true limitation. Like that's just a part of the dog that I can never change. But there is certainly ways that I could improve upon just his ability to be around people and kind of like increase that threshold. Like he can be around people, he can go in public, he can tolerate close proximity, he can even tolerate people touching him, he can tolerate dogs running up to him. But when it ultimately comes down to it, like I don't let people pet him. You know, I don't let him meet strange dogs, because that is kind of a hard limitation for him in that way.
Yeah. Right. Like I just had a client recently, to go off your point of when not to push limitations, is this dog has been acted pretty viciously around the teenage boys that come into the house. So we did an in-home recently, and I had the dog on a bed stay, and a couple of the teenage boys came into the house, and the dad was like, well, can they go all pet him? And I was like, let's not push his buttons there, because he's already on a place, and I don't want him to feel trapped. We're forcing him to be pet. And I just kind of explained that to them, like I don't want to force a dog to be tolerant of pets when they're extremely uncomfortable, because at that point that's not fair to me. Yes, the dog can stay in the bed stay while the teenage boys are playing video games and getting up and yelling and watching sports, but I'm not interested in pushing the dog in a way that's going to be negative for both children and the dog.
Yeah. I wonder, what do you guys think? I've been thinking about this since we decided on this topic. How do you think you know what is a limitation that can be overcome and what is a limitation that is a true limitation? Like, how do you think you can distinguish that?
That's a really good point.
That is a good point. I mean, I don't know if this is necessarily the best answer, but with just trial and error, you know, you're not gonna know with Lumos and stuff, with him, you know, it's not, because it's like over time, you've done the training, you've realized, okay, this just isn't the best situation, right?
Yeah.
And you were like, okay, fine, you know, I'm sure you've tried multiple times. I'm sure it just wasn't one time you tried socializing with dogs or people or whatever, and he blew up or whatever, and you were like, oh, okay, well, we're done, you know? I'm sure there were multiple times where it was like, okay, you know what, this works for him, for me, for them, so cool, right? There's no need to push it. So I don't know if that's like the best answer, but trying to kind of figure out what works for you as well as the dog. You know, I think that people do, if they think about it, you know, they do have a fairly good understanding for, you know, how their dog reacts, the signs of when their dog's, you know, learning their specific dog's body language. You know, I feel like we're generally pretty good about reading like majority of dogs, but I feel like owners just have that like relationship with their dog where they can tell when they're nervous and everything. Yeah, so it's just something I think that it's just like, if you were to focus on just like, how does this situation actually affect this dog, you know? And does my communication and does the training really help? Or is it more kind of like making it worse? Is it kind of neutral, right? And then just kind of piecing stuff from there. But I mean, I don't know, I'd be interested to see what you say as well.
I would say like, I'm always a little bit analytical and I'm weighing pros and cons and risk and benefit. Like, does this benefit my dog? So will a bunch of teenage boys coming over my dog and petting it, does this benefit him? And my answer is no, because in that specific situation when I'm present in the training session, the dog might do fine. But one time the dog may be uncomfortable with how it's being touched or how it's being handled and may snap. And then that's a bigger risk to me of somebody getting hurt than it is a benefit to the dog. So for nail trims, the benefit is being able to safely do the dog's nails and then be compliant, you know, and not have the skeletal problems or the joint problems that long nails can cause. So that's a clear benefit to me.
And not having the stress on their heart and their organs from being sedated every single time.
Exactly.
They have to have it done.
For me, it's very clear, like, does this benefit my dog with non-human emotions behind it? Like, do I want my dog to say hi to everybody and be that friendly dog? Is that in their nature? And if it is and they like that, sure, go say hi to people that I have selected in our house.
Yeah.
And maybe like how,
yes, that I'm allowing.
Yeah, and maybe like how easily avoidable some certain things are.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if it's a situation where it's like your dog does not like children, that's pretty easy to keep your dog away from kids.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily a boundary you have to push.
Right.
You know, especially when the risk is so high.
Yeah.
When you could just like put your dog away.
Yeah.
You know, or when you're out in public, just make sure that you're very aware. Don't go places with kid playgrounds. Don't go, you know, stuff like that. With like, and kind of, I think this kind of, now that I heard both of your guys' answers and kind of what I was thinking too is like, obviously like we have, say we have a dog who's aggressive. We'll just use the most extreme case, right? This dog has active live bites on like people or whatever. And the owners, you know, always are asking at that first or second session, like, will my dog ever be able to be around people or like people or whatever? And really my answer is like, we won't know until we know, until we really get to that point. And so it's like, we have our plan and our process of how we train, our safety protocols we put in place, how once we get to that point, how we would go about introducing them to new people, things like that. And so it's almost like we have our structured plan and then we let the dog kind of like guide where's the end, where's our ceiling.
You're living with like training and you're applying the things that you've hopefully like sought out a trainer for, and you come up with a plan. Put the dog in situations leading up to that are pretty safe and controlled, and then you can go from there. Like the shepherd you recently had, where the woman was like, I want it to be like my other dog. And you're like, unfortunately, I don't think that's gonna happen. You have to be realistic, and I think that was a really good example.
I think that's really hard for some people too, you know, but, or especially some, you know, that they've had a specific breed their whole life, and then they finally get one that's just nuts or whatever, you know, and they're like, well, you know, like, I've had all these dogs in the past that were so good at being with kids or
Yeah.
playing fetcher with other dogs, I don't know, whatever, you know?
Yeah.
And now it's like this, and it's just like, well, those are dogs, you know? No dog's exactly the same, like no person's exactly the same, so it's just something where it's like, okay, well, let's manage it. What do we need to actually focus on?
Yeah.
To like mourn the loss of the dog that you thought you were going to get sometimes, and say goodbye to that picture in your head and be like, all right, how do I adjust with this new dog, and how, because it's a living creature and we can't always mold it into what we want. So we have to find out how we live with these dogs and have it be successful if we're committed to keeping them.
Yeah, it's almost like you kind of have to let the dog decide like what their limitations are,
Yeah.
to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Like, I think that only works if you're doing everything you can and everything correctly in your training process. Like, the reason why Lumos is still at a point where his hard line is don't let people pet me is because we've hit that multiple times, and he's never ever once been like, oh, I actually do want that person to pet me. His body language has never told me, oh, please let me go say hi to that person.
Yeah.
He has zero interest in meeting new people.
Yeah.
And the times where like we've done the whole like, and again with safe precautions, muzzled, things like that, where we've done our technique of like inviting the dog over to meet the person and not being approached, you know, he goes over and he stands there like this the whole time. And if anything, he looks at him like,
It's like, I'm doing this
Stop
because mom
touching
is making me do it.
yeah, and even though they like invited him,
Or asking me,
because he's not a nervous, aggressive dog, he's just a dick.
Yeah.
He'll go over, confident as ever, and then it's like once he gets there and they're petting him, he's like, who the fuck are you to be touching me right now? You know what I mean?
Like clearly uncomfortable.
Clearly, so it's like once that's happened so many times, it's like obviously that's the boundary for him.
It's
You know,
necessary.
he's like, it's not necessary. It's very easy for me to say, don't touch my dog, you know? And he comes around, you know, he loves you guys now and stuff like that. Like, he gets there on his own time. But that is something for me that it's like, I, you know, very clearly that's his line. He doesn't want to do that. Do you guys believe that in training, like obedience related things, off leash, stuff like that, do you think there's ever cases where you have to draw like a limitation and be like, training wise with obedience and stuff like that, there's maybe certain situations your dog can't be in or can't do well in, distractions, like do you think that's real?
I personally, in most cases, no. I think people can have a well-trained dog, but they have to put the consistency into the training, and you have to meet the client where they're at. And if they're not a super consistent person and they can kind of admit that, and they're like, no, I don't really care about off leash, I'm like, okay, we don't have to do off leash. But if they're like, I want off leash, how do we get to that point? We can help you get to that point, certainly, but it will be work at home. It will be continued efforts of working through things, working through distractions. If your dog is struggling around crowds of people, and you can take them into a crowd successfully and have them like do it down and observe the things, I definitely think people get into this crap of being like, oh, they're too stubborn to do that. Oh, they're too scared to do that. And you're putting these humanized feelings on your dog when you could really work through a lot of that. So it's really up to what the client wants or what the client is looking for, in helping them achieve that, in my personal opinion.
And I think a lot of times too, it's the owners that feel that way too. You know, they're nervous for their dog to be nervous, or they're, you know, they're scared for their dog to be scared or something. So it's something where it's like, and that's one thing I always like tell like owners and stuff is that, you know, your confidence in this training and your dog and stuff is just as important as their confidence in understanding the commands, you know. Now, I think that I would agree in the sense that the majority of things you can at least like bring them to situations, right, and walk them around relatively small crowds and stuff. But I do think there are a few situations where it can be much, especially like off-leash stuff, where, you know, you just might have to be a lot more, you know, focused on the dog and manage that dog a lot more than you would say for other dogs, you know, where you can kind of be out and about at a park or something and kind of focus on something while the dog is laying in it down and whatever. and still be aware, but not like strictly aware of like where every person, dog, and stuff is. I think there are certain situations definitely where like, you know, there are certain dogs that I've worked with that, you know, they try all the time. That the owner wakes up at 5 a.m. to run the dog, and it's just to avoid the people and all that stuff. And they've come a long way, but they've also kind of with Lumos they've kind of like hit this wall in the sense of just like they can be around people now and be around dogs and all that, but it's not like, I don't think she necessarily can get to that point with the Roddy that it's going to be off leash, you know? Yeah.
And that's a good case. Like, I think there are case by case basis.
Well, and it might just be like just because maybe you could doesn't mean you should.
Yeah.
I think that's like a good thing to think about too. Like, you know, could I take Lumos to like a kid's playground and make him hold a sit while kids run around him? Yes, but should I do that? Probably not.
Yeah.
Like, that's probably not a great idea. Those kids are bound to do something, and then he's bound to be Lumos, and it's like, or like a limitation that I know I could probably work on and just don't is people coming in my house with him. I just put him in a kennel.
Yeah, because that's what you want.
Exactly. Like, could I work on that? Could he hold a bed stay the whole time that they're there? Yes. But I don't want to.
Yeah. You're going to the kitchen and to get a drink, and the person's like, "Hi, Luna."
Exactly. It's like, yeah, so it's like, could I do those things? Yes. But I don't really want to, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
You know, like you said, you have clients that are like, I never want to do off leash. That makes me so uncomfortable and nervous. Okay.
We're not gonna like step in and be like, no, we have to do off leash.
Because those are the people that would have problems off leash because they're not comfortable, they're not committed. I've had people where they're like, at the beginning, they're like, we never want to do off leash, and I tell them, I'm like, that's totally fine. By the time we get to the end, you might change your mind. Because the dog you're going to have at the end of this is very different from the dog that you have now. So you might feel more comfortable. So if that changes,
limitations on it, where it's just like, I don't want to do off leash. I don't want to worry about off leash because it's not even a possibility you can get to. And it's just, and that's a good way. That's a good point to make. Where it's just like, well, it could change, you know, later, and if it does, then.
But if it doesn't, that's fine too.
Yeah.
You know.
Going through the training process, you start to begin to see different side of your dog, which people. It's a true growth. Like from the first session, they're like, this is my list of cants with my dog. And then slowly by the end of the session, we have a lot of cans and we don't have a lot of cans. So the dog is actively growing and people are like, oh, this is really working. My relationship with my dog is improving vastly and I have a lot of this control over them. And then that can shift their mindset of like, oh, maybe I can have off leash if they wanted to. Like Oakley's parents, for instance, we were having that discussion, and they're a little bit older of a couple, and she's like, I don't think I ever want an off leash, and I said, totally fine. That is your choice at your comfort level. If we don't ever want to have an off leash, then that's totally up to her.
But also in turn, like if you're gonna decide that that's something you don't want, so for instance me, like I don't have any desire to work on Lumos with strangers coming to my house, then I can't one day be like, let me just open the door and see what happens.
Yeah, let's see. Let's experiment.
Yeah, no, once I've committed to like he goes in a kennel and stranger comes over, that's what I have to do then, unless I decide to then actively start to work on it.
Yeah, and consistently, because we can't change the consistency, even though he's very well behaved and he's very, very well trained and you've trained him very thoroughly, we can't just flip the script and expect him to be perfect right away.
Exactly, yeah. So I mean, I think that kind of like what you were saying, Seamus, is like, it's kind of like a balance of like assessing like the whole situation as a whole of like, there might be limitations to what owners or dogs can do. Maybe not because it is impossible to get to that point, but just because maybe the owner doesn't have the handling skills that would be necessary. Maybe the dog, and maybe sometimes it's a time thing. Like you could have, like, for me, I think off leash, I think, is probably like the top tier of like obedience, right?
Yeah.
Being able to have off leash. And for me, the scariest dogs when you're transitioning to off leash that would worry me the most are like the fearful flighty ones.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Even aggressive dogs don't really concern me as much because it's more so like when a dog is fearful, they do weird shit.
Yeah.
They do really
Unpredictable
weird stuff.
Like,
Yeah.
biologically, their instinct is to flight, and that is
Yes.
so powerful that
Yes.
if you don't take your time with training it,
Yeah.
they're gone.
Exactly. And so like those are the dogs where I'm like, we are not rushing this. There is no need to rush this because the last thing we need is your dog to just ping. And those are the dogs that you think that they would run to the owner as like their safe place, but they don't.
No.
They just take
They
off.
never do.
They never do. They're just gone. So those are usually the ones that like tend to make me the most nervous.
Yeah.
So for those people, it's less of like a limitation and more of like a right now it's a limitation. Let's continue working, you know, and get to where the dog's confidence is a lot better. When we're on leash, we're not seeing them hear a loud noise and bolt, you know, we're fixing like all of those things along the way and making sure that we're not trying to rush, you know, into something in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it as well as, you know, with us just kind of getting out of winter and everything, that even that has like some set limitations, time limitations to it as well. With like, you can't train your dog all winter or whatever, or before fall or something, and during the winter you're like working on stuff in the house, and then come spring and summer you're like, all right, let's do off leash. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you've done so well in the house all winter. Now let's go and try to do it. It's like, well, you might need to just make sure that the pieces are together, like you were saying. You know, you're doing all the little stuff, and then we can kind of work to that point.
Like a refresher. My time and Sunday is off leash completely, and I wasn't accounting to it's bunny season right now. And bunny took off, and Sunday went right for it, and obviously got a very firm correction, and she scooted her butt right around. And last night we're out again, and we saw a bunny, and she started to go for it, and she was like, never mind. Without any correction needed in that scenario because she didn't break the heel position.
Yeah.
So we're looking for opportunities that the dog is rehearsing a bad behavior, and we're able to give them that firm correction, and we're able to get their attention back on us. That's where I start to see like, okay, success is coming, the limitations are lifting.
Well, and that could be, I mean, that's a good topic too, is like, I think that maybe this could be an unpopular thing, but like with certain breeds comes along certain limitations, I think too, or challenges.
Yeah.
So like if you have a beagle like Sunday, or you have a very high prey drive dog, your challenges for off leash are just immensely more than a golden retriever, your average, you know, or dogs like that. Because I don't think there'll ever be a time where you would 100% trust that Sunday's not going to take off after an animal.
Yeah.
If she saw it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Not that she would do it every single time, but there's always going to be that thought in your head, like with that, where you're like, oh, she absolutely could.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, since like walking near any roads or anything, I used to do it completely off leash, and now I'm like, the risk of her darting out before I can address it is so high that I'm just gonna slip her when we're back in our neighborhood and back in the street, because that's what I feel like I'd like to do for her safety.
Oh, for sure.
I even do that with Sully when we leave here. You know, it's like
Yeah.
could be off leash, but it's like
It's the risk is
Yeah.
you have to weigh like the risk versus the reward at that point, and it's just too high. Or even like there's some breeds that like don't do well with being around the same sex of other dogs, and that's there's always exceptions, but that's a pretty consistent thing with some dogs. There's like Lumos does way better with female dogs than he ever would with male dogs. You know what I mean? Like that's just stuff that is like, okay, not again, that doesn't mean that he can't be around male dogs, but it has to be more heavily managed at that point. So stuff like that, I think. And, you know, even with my own dog Cash, I think another example of like a limitation is he will 100% of the time always want to grab food if it is available.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if it is available to him and he's not supervised, he's gonna do it.
Yeah, I have experience with that.
Yeah, and it's like no matter how much I corrected
Yes.
him, no matter how consistently he was corrected for it, no matter how, it doesn't matter. He will take a correction and as he's being corrected,
Yeah.
still eat whatever it is that he was going to eat.
Yeah.
So it's like for him, the way that I've had to do it is like obviously putting everything away, nothing's on the counter anymore, and just managing him better to where he's not just wandering around in the kitchen up to no good all
Trying
the
to find
time.
what he wants to get
Yeah.
next. Yeah.
If I leave food on my coffee table and I have to get up, I literally just say come and he comes with me
Yeah.
while I go do whatever I'm doing and then we
Yeah.
go back in. Because it's like I know that's an issue.
Yeah.
And again, I there's just certain things for certain dogs, they're opportunists.
Yeah. And
When they have the opportunity, they're gonna take it, man.
exactly. Like Sunday, for instance, like I bring her up a lot, but poop eating is a huge one for her, and I've corrected Sunday for poop eating on a very firm level 1,000 million times.
We all have.
And I have to be neurotic about it in my yard, and sometimes I'm like, I don't want to have to be neurotic about this today, so you're wearing a muzzle out in the yard.
Oh yeah. No,
That's
there's
what I
just
can
certain
manage.
things. Yeah, there's certain things that it's like, yeah, there are gonna be certain limitations for some dogs where no matter what you do.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I think a lot of
Yes.
people get like freaked out about it or really sad about it and stuff.
Yeah.
It's like it's okay to have, like, almost every dog has some sort of limitations. You
Oh,
know?
yeah,
So it's
for sure.
like, you know, so I think a lot of people beat themselves up about it and again are a bit like insecure about, well, like, you know, my dog would never be able to do that, or you know, and it's just like that's not necessarily true. You know, I'm sure that's happened to like both of you with like you're having your dogs out, you're out in public, they're holding it downstairs or whatever, and someone walks by with their dog. Oh my gosh, how did you do that? I'll never be able to do that. And it's like,
Yeah, you can.
You can.
Yeah. It's do you want to do it? You know?
Exactly, yeah.
Put the time and the resources in to teaching your dog that, or would you rather just put a leash on your dog and enjoy your park trip?
Yeah, or would you rather just be okay with them pulling a little bit and zigzagging a little bit, and that's fine, right? Because clearly that's okay for them. You know?
Yeah.
They
No,
would
I
probably want it, but it's the work that you put in.
Mm-hmm.
the journey could look a lot different for every single dog.
Yeah.
You know, to get to a certain place. It could take longer, it could be shorter, it could be different techniques, it could be different methods. Like I have a dog, Sparky, that I'm working with right now who's 12. He's an old man. I love Sparky. And he, his whole life, he's just done whatever the fuck he wanted, you know, and just yelling at everything, barking at everything. Very reactive on leash, severe separation anxiety. Like this dog's anxiety is like through the roof. And they have a house now, like a lake house that they go to, and it's like a condo, and the issue is now that when they leave, he's just barking nonstop, and they're like, our neighbors cannot hate us. Like this cannot happen.
Yeah.
So, you know, we've been working with him quite a bit, and it's been he's been a dog that I don't feel like stumped by him by any means, but he's really made me dig deep in my arsenal of like weird things to do to help him work through some stuff, and a lot of like problem solving, a lot of troubleshooting things to see what works well for him, because he's just a very unique guy. And I think sometimes I think to myself, not that I'm like this incredible person or anything, but sometimes I think about how like most, I would say, average trainers probably wouldn't do that much troubleshooting with dogs. Like I think about, because like him, he screams all the time. You've heard him in the lobby. He's very vocal. He's whining. And the last couple sessions have really just been trying different techniques and different ways of doing exercises to figure out what clicks in his head to help him like organically be able to calm down a little bit. And for me, I just find that stuff very fascinating. Like that's like very interesting to me to like get into the psyche of the dog and figure out what's gonna work.
That's like my favorite part.
Yeah, like what about like, and what we finally landed on for him, because some dogs being stationary helps them calm down.
Mhm.
Some dogs, it makes it worse.
Yeah.
Truly, I feel like.
Mhm.
For him, that was kind of the case. Like last session, we did just a bed stay the whole time and no progress. He was just whining the whole time. So this week I was like, okay, let's try like a ton of movement in the beginning of the session to see if that wears him out a little bit, helps him process the anxiety through movement, structured movement, you know, calm, sit, calm, you know, just very quick moving, one to the next to the next. And then we'll do a longer bed stay. It was like a little bit better, but not great. And so then I thought back to like my horse training days, and we used to do, so when horses are buddy sour, it's basically separation anxiety for horses, where they want to be with other horses all the time. And when you take them away from horses, they rear, buck, pull, drag just to get back. And I had a horse that was like this, the one that bucked me off and gave me my head injury. But the way that you fix that, or a technique that you can do to fix that, is you work them super hard while they're with other horses to the extent that they hate being around other horses. Like they're like, I don't even want to be here anymore. So it's like you work the shit out of them around the horses, and then when you take them away, they get treats and apples and all this good stuff. They get brushed and groomed, and it's great. And so in their head, it's like this weird reverse psychology where they're like, every time I'm in the pasture with horses, I'm getting lunged and I'm having to work really hard, and then when I'm away, it's nice. And so I like tried a concept of that with Sparky today, where I just made him work like super, super hard. And then when he went to the bed, he was like, oh, thank God.
Yeah.
I just want to stay on the bed. And then I'd take him off before he could settle, and I could see in his face, he's like, just put me on the bed. And then as soon as he'd go back to the bed, he'd be like, oh, this is amazing. And we just do longer and longer, and we got to where being on the bed was like amazing. He's like, oh, this is so nice, I need to take a break. And the vocalization like drastically decreased. And it was like the most success that we had seen so far. But I very easily could have said to them, that's just a limitation for him. He's always going to be loud. And I maybe would have necessarily not been wrong in saying that, but also like, why not figure it out?
Why not? Like,
you
take
know?
time to troubleshoot. And
Yeah, like let's like try to figure that stuff out rather than immediately being like, oh, he's 12, he's been doing this his whole life. There's no way. You know, there's no way that it's going to change. Doesn't really matter if it changes. But like, I feel like troubleshooting like that and trying to figure out stuff, one, is super fascinating. But two, like, it really benefits the dog, it benefits the owners, because they look at it and they're like, wow, like, you really care. Like, you're really trying to like figure this stuff out.
That's pretty interesting. Like, as I coming into my own with one-on-one sessions, like creativity, I've needed a little bit of support and help from David coming into situations because he can see it in a different way than I can. And having the support of him being able to be like, this, or this. I'm like, oh. So all of these are learning opportunities to have my creative box like you do to dig into. And finding myself getting better at it and troubleshooting. So like with Sparky, like, it's just probably such a relief that they're starting to see a little bit of progress with it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's one that was quite the guy.
Yeah, and I'd rather like keep working on it than like having people be like, well, this is it?
Yeah.
Well, that's it?
Yeah, exactly.
And they're like, yeah, that's it. And they're like, but I don't want it.
Yeah.
Put them on trazodone.
Yeah. No, so that was something that happened today that was like, I mean, that's a good example of like, could have been a limitation. And, you know, they probably would have accepted that.
Yeah.
And been like, okay, he's just loud.
Yeah.
But
again,
you
but
know,
even in those situations where it's just like, you do kind of hit those limitations of like, okay, well, yep, this is that wall, this is Lumos's wall, whatever. As long as you've tried A, B, C, D, you know, whatever, the whole alphabet, then it's like, okay, then we've tried all our options. This is either what's worked best, and then you can even, out of A through Z, what route was the best? You know, what did you figure out gave you at least some more of that upper step than the other ones? And then it's like, okay, well, let's get rid of the other ones, let's focus on that. and see what that is, and then and go from there. It's the consistency, and it's not just giving up and just allowing it to be, because it's even something where it's like, okay, he just doesn't like strangers and stuff like that. It's like, that's fine. You don't have to keep pushing it. It's just something where it's like, but also like, don't give up on it. It doesn't mean don't take him to any more parks. Don't ever take him outside. Don't ever do, what I mean?
Yeah,
it's
don't
like,
have to completely isolate him.
Right.
And even it's not like he's unable, like I don't isolate him from getting to know new people. I just take a different approach with it. I found something that works better. And what works the best for him is telling people to completely ignore him to the point where he gets to where he's like, no, you're tripping. You know what I mean? And then it's like it's almost like a weird reverse psychology thing where then he wants you to pay attention because you won't. Yeah. And then you build this value, and when you finally do, he's like, oh, this is amazing.
That was my approach with Lumos, and I still remember to this day, I completely ignored him. Yeah. When you first started bringing him around, and then one day he brought me that little green stick, and he dropped it, and he was like, throw it. And I was like, I'm in. Yeah. And now he kisses me sometimes, and I'm still not going to get in his face and kiss on him, but I respect him as a dog, and I respect his boundaries, and he respects that I don't try to push those, so he feels safe with me.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know, how would we sum this up, guys? That I think it's normal for every dog to have certain quirks and limitations in certain areas, and that as long as you're work with a trainer who has experience in whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, and a good knowledge base, gives you good support. Follow your training plan, take all the processes and procedures very seriously, and let the dog kind of guide you through the rest. Of like what they're gonna be capable of, because we can only go by the signs they're giving us, and where we think that line will be for them.
Yeah. Sometimes that takes recalibrating expectations and looking at your dog in a different way and trying new things. But again, working with a trainer to get to the bottom of what is working versus what's not can be really helpful to the longevity of your dog and providing a really joyous life for them.
And don't limit yourself to certain techniques and certain styles of training. Yeah. It would, to me, like limiting the type of training that you would do with your dog, obviously like humane training, would be like me going to the doctor with an ailment and being like, these are the only treatments I'll accept. And they're not going to work. Not gonna and it's like, no, that's the doctor. Like they know what they're supposed to, they know the treatments, they know the medications, they know what is going to be successful in like healing this ailment or helping it. And why would I limit them in what they're able to do and the knowledge they're able to give me just because I think that this is right or this is wrong? Yeah. Like, yes, use your judgment on when you're working with trainers. Like, trust your gut. If something doesn't feel right or doesn't look right, you're probably right about that. But, when it comes to training styles, like, don't limit yourself with like, well, my dog didn't take any treats to fix the reactivity, so I guess we're done, There's other things available to that.
My biggest thing is, don't doubt yourself and don't doubt your dogs, And then what I've said almost every podcast too is ask questions. Yes. Ask multiple questions, ask multiple sources, right? There's always going to be help out there, and you just have to kind of pick and choose where you want to go from there. Yes. So that would be also my biggest advice.
If you feel like you haven't found a good fit for you and your dog training-wise, like, it exists. Yeah. Don't give up. Yeah. Keep looking for it and find it, because they're out there.
I agree.
Well, cool. Good chat today, guys.
That was good.
This was a good one. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Hope it helps.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
See you next time.